Now, in 1834, there's going to be a major political shift that takes place in Mexico. We talked about how the Federalists in Mexico had controlled the government for a long period of time, but in 1834, there's going to be yet another military coup. Right? We talked about the political instability of the early Mexican Republic, where there were a number of military coups and revolutions. Well, another one will occur in 1834, and this one is going to be led by Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. All right, he has actually been in charge of several military coups and revolutions in the past, and so 1834, Santa Anna is going to overthrow the president, and he's going to take over the government. And in the past, we talked about Santa Anna. We talked about how he was a Federalist. He has been supporting the Federalist cause for a long period of time, but in 1834, he decided to shift his political alliance to the Centralists. So with Santa Anna's revolution, you're going to see the centralists now taking power in the Mexican Republic. And you may remember we were talking about the political ideology of the centralists, right? They don't want the states to have sovereignty. They want the central government to hold a lot more of the power. They want to take away sovereignty from the states so that the central government has a lot more control over the states in Mexico. And so you're going to see a number of changes take place in the Mexican government after this military coup led by Santa Anna. And so one of these major changes is the repeal of the Constitution of 1824. All right, and so this Constitution, this is what created the form of government there in Mexico, right? It was a federal constitution. The Federalists had won the debate. And so they had this, federal style of government where the states had sovereignty. So this is going to change, though, now that the Centralists take power. So they pretty much get rid of the Constitution of 1824, and they will create a new Constitution in 1836. And so this means less local autonomy for the states. And that means Texas is not going to have much political power at all, because the central government now is going to have much more power over the states. And so around this time, you're going to start hearing calls for Texas independence. Many Anglo-Texans are going to call for independence from Mexico because they don't like the fact that the sovereignty of Texas is going to be taken away now that the Centralists have gained power in the Mexican government. And it wasn't just the Anglo-Americans who were calling for the independence of Texas from Mexico. You had a number of Mexican citizens as well who were calling for independence, including the prominent political leader Lorenzo de Zavala. You may remember Zavala. He was heavily involved in the creation of the Constitution of 1824, right? He was one of the framers of the Constitution. He was also a founder of York Rite Lodges in Mexico. These were the Masonic lodges of the Federalists. And so Zavala is a Federalist, right? And so he definitely supports the Federalist cause. He doesn't like the idea that the Constitution of 1824 has been repealed after Santa Anna had taken over the country. And before this, he was actually a minister to France. And so he was a prominent political leader in the Mexican Republic before Santa Anna overthrew the government. But after that happened, he starts to agitate the Anglo-Americans and Mexican settlers and pushing them to call for Texas independence because he didn't like the fact that Santa Anna had repealed the Constitution of 1824 and he was basically had the powers of a dictator. Okay, and so because of that, Zavala did not respect his authority, and he would push Anglo-Americans and Mexican settlers in Texas to call for Texas independence, all right, from Mexico. Now, even before the Centralists took power in 1834, you still had a number of Anglo-American immigrants who were upset with Mexican rule. Right? One of the things that they were upset about was the fact that Texas did not have much political authority. All right, because Texas was not a state on its own. It was actually connected with the state of Coahuila in northern Mexico. And so when it came to making political decisions, Coahuila always dominated politics because they had a much larger population than the population of Texas. Okay, and so you had a number of Anglo-American immigrants there in Texas who were upset about this because they could not really control politics. They were always going to be a minority group as long as Texas was connected with the northern state of Coahuila. In fact, they actually wanted Texas to be separate from the state of Coahuila. For a while there, you had individuals like Steve Austin who were calling for the separation of Texas from Coahuila, so Texas would still be a state in Mexico, but just separate politically from Coahuila, so that Texas would have more political authority on its own. But all that changed anyway when the centralists took power, because the states would lose their local autonomy anyhow, as the centralists greatly reduced the sovereignty of the states, and instead they created a number of military districts where you had members of the military that would be appointed by the president to control those military districts, right? So a lot of the sovereignty of the states, where they would create their own state legislatures, create their own laws, that sovereignty would be taken away under the authority of the centralists. So that just made things even worse for Anglo-American immigrants in Texas, and that's why they were so open to the idea of calling for complete independence from Mexico, right? So to establish their own republic. And in 1835, you have a convention taking place. Let's take a look at this map. Here in Washington on the Brazos, you would have a convention of Anglo-American immigrants as well as some Mexican settlers, and at this convention you would have the decision made that Texas would become its own independent republic, the Lone Star Republic. Okay, and so at this convention you would have a number of government officials being chosen, right? So they would actually choose a president. The president of this new republic, the Lone Star Republic, would be a man named David Burnett, and Lorenzo de Zavala would be the vice president. Okay, so this was not just an Anglo-American movement for Texas independence. You have prominent Mexican political leaders who took part in this movement. Okay, and so they would declare independence from Mexico, start their own republic, the Lone Star Republic, and even choose political officials for this new government.